Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's fourth space. Thanks for joining us for today's event, the Indigenous Futures Research Center Annual Research Symposium. We would like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. And we respect the continued connections with the past, the present, and future, and our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. Here at Fourth Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge. We co-create daily activities, projects, research questions, and development across the university. And we're running today's event as a live stream to Zoom and to YouTube. So if you're joining us there, your comments and questions are really important. Please add those into the chat, and we'll do our best to read those out a little bit later. And for those of you here in the space, it's great to have you. Just raise your hand. We'll bring a microphone around if you have any comments or questions also. Okay, with that, it's very much my pleasure to hand the microphone over to our coordinator with Indigenous Community Engagement, the Geneviève Sioui. Bienvenue.
Thank you, Doug. Doug and I have, we do this often, and now I'm the Geneviève and he's the Doug. So it's a little inside joke. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here for the first panel of the IFRC Symposium. We're gonna try to bring some energy and sort of break the ice with a first conversation on community engaged research. So I'm Geneviève, I'm Wendat on my dad's side, and I work here at the Office of Community Engagement. So we're located in this building, same floor in Diagonal. And what we do is supporting community engagement, so collaborations between the university and communities and community organization. And I focus on collaboration with Indigenous communities. I brought some postcards and a bit of like things about our programming if ever you're interested afterwards. And today we are having a conversation with 5 students, 4 here, 1 online, and a 6th student who's has been having car problems. So he's gonna slide in the panel when he arrives. But the students who you'll be hearing from today, what they have in common is that they all receive funding through a program that we run called Selfies. So it's a funding program for Indigenous grad students, so who are doing their master's or PhD, and who are doing community-based research, so who have community members involved in different ways in their research, and that's exactly what we're gonna talk about today. They are gonna share how they involve community in their research, what are some of the benefits and the challenges, and how they've been adapting to doing this. When they introduce themselves, you'll notice that some of them are doing their MA, others are doing their PhD, and they're all at different stages in their research, and they're also in different disciplines. So I think it should be really interesting to think about community-based research across different disciplines and like stages of research. So I'll pass the mic over to them, ask them to introduce themselves, tell us a bit about their research, so that then we can talk about ways that we work with community more in depth.
Thank you, Geneviève. Thank you for the space. All of you are always welcoming me. Oh my God. I am Christine Khilasi. I am from Saluit in Côte-d'Ivoire. I've been living in Tiohtià:ke for a very long time. I am in my comps right now at the PhD level in Inuit oral history in the individualized program. I love it. It's going really good. And my focus is on bringing archives from Avatak Cultural Institute and bringing them to Saluit or across Nunavik so that youths and elders and artists can breathe new life into these archives. It's going to be so fun.
My turn, okay. Segu folks, I'm Brooke Wasandia-Stadir. I'm Ganya Gahaga from Kahnawake and a member of the Turtle Clan. I earned a Bachelor's of Commerce degree, majoring in management from here, Concordia, in 2018. And now I'm doing a Master of Science in Management. I actually started the program in 2018, left for a while, came back. So here I am, ready to do my research. I've worked in management roles since 2018 and have held several leadership roles in Kahnawake organizations, as well as the Montreal Indigenous nonprofit sector. And I currently work full-time for the Mohawk Council of Kahnawake Housing Unit. My research is focused on community infrastructure projects in Kahnawake. This includes reviewing archival community data from construction of community buildings, as well as recreational sites and other infrastructure projects. My research mostly focuses on archival data from multi-year projects that have involved heavily community consultation or participation. So my research looks at the legitimacy of community infrastructure projects, and legitimacy explains the public acceptance, support, and recognition of a project as being valid.
Hi, my name is Savannah. I am Red River Métis from Winnipeg. My background is I have a Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology from the University of Manitoba. And then currently I am doing my Master's of Arts in Anthropology here at Concordia. My research is based on how museums are incorporating Indigenous voices and Indigenous engagement into their exhibitions as well as their policies. And specifically using the Manitoba Museum as a case study, as I used to work there and I've worked at various museums throughout Manitoba. So just a little more familiar with the spaces, and kind of looking at how engagement is used in a purposeful and meaningful way rather than just like something to use as a checklist. So going about that way, and then using community members' inputs on how they feel about these incorporations and how their experiences at the museum have changed over time, or how they feel that it is impactful or if it is not impactful, and all that kind of stuff.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for showing up for the first panel. My name is Melissa Granovsky. I am a Red River Métis and Jewish person. I was born and raised in Treaty 1 in Winnipeg. And I am a PhD candidate in art education here at Concordia. I've had kind of an interesting journey to get here. I have an undergrad in a Bachelor of Education at University of Winnipeg. And then I pivoted into a Master's of Adult Education, and I moved to Nova Scotia at St. Francis Xavier University. And that's where I kind of fell in love with arts-based research. So I pivoted and then moved into art education here at Concordia. So, I have a lot of educational background, and now I'm kind of finding my way with arts. My research is really focused on how to decolonize a research method called photo voice as a tool for mentorship. So alongside being a PhD candidate, I'm also a mentorship manager at Indigenous Friends Association. And so what we do there is we train First Nations, Inuit, and Métis learners all online in the areas of UX design, web development, digital art, customer service. And I kind of create the mentorship program to pair mentees, because this is a fully virtual learning space, with people that have gone through the program, or people that are in tech already. So I'm always trying to find ways to humanize the internet. And so that's kind of what the focal point of my research is all about. Really happy to be here today.
Thank you. I think I'll go to Agathe just to give Wade a little bit of time to settle in, and then we'll come back to you, Wade.
My turn. I'm having a hard time hearing you, but my name is Harriet Agat Ransom. I'm from Akwesasne. I am a PhD candidate at Concordia, and I'm also a full-time Mohawk language teacher in Akwesasne. I've been teaching in Akwesasne for over 27 years. I taught regular classrooms, special ed classrooms, every grade. And then the past 6 years, I've transitioned over to the Mohawk language teacher. And that's where my interest is for my PhD. I was born and raised in Akwesasne. Both my parents and grandparents were fluent speakers. And I have 4 children who successfully went through the public school system, the universities. And what I found was the cost that getting a degree or a certificate was our language and culture. So the focus of my research is trying to overcome the obstacles in the school that the language teachers and the students are trying to face to revitalize the language. I see the administrators pushing for more of the colonized curriculum. I hear the parents wanting more culture. The teachers are pulled back and forth. So a lot of my research is focused on overcoming these obstacles and trying to create a bridge between the families and the school. And we have immersion schools, but I'm focusing more on the public schools. And instead of just getting a language block for an hour or so, and then you go back out and the rest of the day is English or French or whatever language you're in, I'd like to create a system where the language is woven throughout the whole day. You don't just stop as soon as you walk out of that Mohawk language class. The other teachers will also be helping to support the language. So thank you for being here today. I hope I can hear you because it's really low, so I'll try to pop in when I have something to add to everybody.
Okay,
Thank you.
Should we speak louder then, or is it? Let us know, Agathe, if we need to speak louder so that you can hear us okay. So I'll pass it to you, Wade. Okay. Thanks for being here. We're amongst friends and family.
Thank you.
So no stress.
Yeah, I had a little car problem, so yeah, but I made it, so it's nice.
So if you want to just introduce yourself and also give us an overview of what your research focuses on, and then we'll go into questions about community engagement.
Okay. My name is Wade Paul. I am Woolawastiquet from St. Mary's First Nation in Fredericton, New Brunswick. However, I grew up off reserve in Ontario, in London, Ontario. So I was a guest in Anishinaabe territory. I am a PhD candidate in the Department of History here at Concordia, where I study critical museology. I look at rematriation and repatriations as pathways to reconciliation and archival silences. So again, the way I grew up, I'm not always working with my territory, and I work a lot with other territories. So from a community standpoint, I engage with a lot of research as a guest and in other people's territories. And so, yeah, I think that's something I'll bring to our conversation today in talking about that. Any other key pieces to touch on, or did I get them all?
No, that's good.
Right.
This is just the intro, so we'll get into it. So as you've heard, we have 6 students from different disciplines who some are using archives, others are using stories, others are working with museums, and then with archives around like housing and management and infrastructure. So it's very different. And when we think about community engagement and like community engaged research, there's different ways to engage community at different stages during the research. So I would like to ask you to elaborate a bit on how you center community in your research. So what are the ways that you include and listen to community voices, knowledge, experiences, perspective, and also maybe whose community to you, like who do you work with? And so if you want to go into like more specific examples so that people understand what it means for your specific research, that would be great.
Well, I work with Inuit youths a lot through Tasioktirit, Hakjit. I've taught in Nunavik, and spending a lot of time with the kids, I kind of saw that it's at the discretion of the people who are around them, like the teachers, what level of Inuit content they want to add to the programming. So I thought, when I was working in the archives at Avatak Cultural Institute, I thought I can't be the only one who is seeing this. I thought I want to bring those stories out there to the community members and the youths, and even the wonderful, amazing books that Inuit have been authoring and co-authoring, I thought it's not as accessible in these really big books. So I thought, okay, I wanna highlight all of those stories and bring them to life, also through arts-based methods. So I really want Inuit experiences, Inuit stories to be brought to the forefront and brought back to communities, because mostly, youths are surrounded by, Western content all the time. So I want to really make it a collaborative, collective effort. I want to bring elders and artists and youths all together. So that's how I bring community in the center of my research.
I think I'm going to mix it up. Let's go to Melissa, and then just because of the connections between your research.
Okay, can you hear me okay? So, I think that a great way that I try and center community is, when I started this research, I was already working at Indigenous Friends Association as a mentorship manager. And so all of the programming is totally virtual. And so I wanted to find a way for my mentees to really realize that they have their own inner knowing, and they have a lot of ancestral wisdom, and already, right? And their knowledge system really matters. And so, it's hard to connect to people and really get their stories online. And so that's what really helped me kind of understand this path. So I started to look into photo voice and realize that, although it's really wonderful, it kind of blends narrative and visuals together into the telling of a story. It can be kind of extractive in its original model, in my opinion anyway. So with that in mind, I thought about community first. How can I amend the photo voice model as it is right now so that it focuses not on external policy change to be the primary outcome, but to generate mentee self-determination in terms of problem solving, how to generate dialogue and all of that. So, I really think that the way to center community is to realize that the work that I'm doing is sacred work. And how can this be beneficial for the community that I'm working alongside and not just for myself? And so that's kind of been the springboard. And in terms of my PhD work, a way that I bring in community is I am going to ask prior mentors. Some of them have graduated from the Indigitech program that I work in. Others are, in the tech community, to come and look at this amended model and see, is this going to be a valuable mentorship tool to have mentees share their stories through the means of, sharing their personal anecdotes and photos. And that might really attract, more shy learners or learners that, might not want to share everything. So they get to be very specific. So that's kind of how I focus on community throughout my work.
I think I'm going to ask Agathe if you want to share the ways that you're working with community, because you're also in education. So I'd be curious if you can give us more details on who you work with and the ways that you're involving parents and learners.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I switched over to another laptop. Well, I work in the schools, and a lot of my research I've been doing is like I said, revitalizing the language. So as I was doing my research, it started out with decolonizing the schools and what does that look like, and we moved into land-based learning, outdoor learning, and it kind of geared around everything that the students are learning is what the teacher knew. So if you had a teacher who was knowledgeable in Indigenous knowledge, then the students were fine. But if there was a new teacher in there that had limited resources on it or wasn't not Indigenous or new, then what she passed along wasn't like, not everybody's getting the same level of experience and knowledge in there. So as I went on with the research, what we need to have a successful revitalization program is to have parents, community experts, and everybody working together to pass along the knowledge. So part of my research that I did here was like I have backed up literature that says we need to have the parents involved. This is what the parents want. So what I did with my research was I actually had like a language day and I got everybody together, parents and families together. Different community members came in and shared like stories and language activities with them. And then I was able to talk to the parents and we did a little survey, but I got numbers from the parents and what did they want to see in the schools and how do they project things happening in the future, and then even built a bridge between the parents and other community members. So I don't think I could do my research without including the community. So it was very important for me to have this information. So now when I do my research, I have numbers, I have actual parents from the school that we're in that's saying this is what I would like to see in the school versus this literature says we need parents. So it's very important to include community in my research.
Thank you. So we're hearing from the first three examples how they're working directly with people and engaging community through groups and interviews and activities. And now I'd like to pass it to Brooke, Savannah, and Wade because they are doing a bit of different kind of research, working more with archives and like different types of archives. So I'd like to know like the archives you're working on and with, and also how do you see that connection with community? How are you involving community members and who in your research? Do you want to start, Brooke? Yeah.
Okay. Where to start? Okay. I guess maybe just on the, how my research topic came about. I could say my community engagement in this project has been 30 years in the making. I'm working with my community, Kahnawake. A lot of the relationships that I have with people involved, it's long-standing, people who I collaborate with outside of this academic research and in my professional life as a community member. I'm not necessarily working with individuals, but community organizations and the people who represent them. So the way I developed my topic was, thinking of something that was, I guess, kind of timely, relevant, and something that could help solve some issues faced by community organizations. And so when I had the idea to work on compiling, I guess, data from community infrastructure projects from the last 30 years or so. I started by, identifying the research project, the infrastructure projects, about 30 of them I identified from 10 different organizations. And I reached out to those organizations right away to kind of validate, I guess, the topic. I asked them, do you think this is necessary? Is it a good idea? Would it be valuable? How do you see yourself being involved in the project? And then I also invited them to, pose any questions that they had that they wanted me to incorporate into the research while I was, doing this review of archival information. So that's, how I first involved community members. And since then, it's been mostly working with archival data. So I've gotten information from community publications, like information that each community organization has published themselves, whether that's from press releases, reports, announcements, feasibility studies, whatever they've produced. And then I've also used gray papers, so newspapers. In Kahnawake, we have a great community newspaper, And so I've combed through the archives since the early 90s, and that has actually been really great. I've also contemplated using other sources like audio archives through our community radio station. That the data set was a little bit limited and didn't have information on all the projects that I was interested in. So yeah, it's been kind of a process, and you know, even going through our newspaper archives, that has involved me going to, you know, the Kahnawake library and combing through physical stacks of newspapers. So it's been pretty interesting. Yeah. I don't know if that answers the question.
Because I have to say it here, can you just briefly touch on why you're using like secondary sources, and how, like, why using archives is still considered community engaged research?
Yeah, I think the main reason is that the data and the information is already there. It's coming directly from community members, community organizations, and I didn't want to, I guess, I wanted to be considerate of their time, and also it's, you know, when you're looking at a project from like the early 2000s or 1990s, there's a lot of turnover in organizations, and the people, you know, currently in place or working may not actually have the information. And yeah, so I really wanted to be conscious of people's time, and, you know, to be aware that, like, this is my academic project. It's not necessarily something that they've initiated. They're interested in it, but, you know, I wanted to make sure that the project is kind of in service of them and not taking up their valuable time and resources.
Thank you. So I'll pass it to, are you ready, Samantha? Do you want to share how you're involving community members and which needs you're hoping to address?
Yeah, so like I said, working at the Manitoba Museum, there's a lot of different communities involved in the prairies. So kind of narrowing it down to one has been hard, so I haven't. I've just kind of left it open. But the nice thing about museums is a lot of the people who are there or who are involved are genuinely passionate about their collections. And how those collections are cared for and what is in collections. And the Manitoba Museum, while it acts as a provincial museum, it is not. It is not funded whatsoever by the province. It's fully non-for-profit. So having that in mind and having that like average museum experience of how can communities get involved with these institutions when these institutions don't really have the money to get people involved. So one big thing that I have, like people I've worked with at the museum, has been on their Indigenous advisory circle. And those are people from a bunch of different communities, and how those, and how that advisory circle is actually used has been something that I've been really interested in, just because it is inherently part of the governance structure of the museum now. So how they are actually utilizing that and using community knowledge to the museum's benefit, as well as the community's benefit, because everything is now done on community terms. So I'm really interested in how community members are feeling about those experiences and how their experiences at the museum have been impacted by these changes, but also on like the other side of things, looking at how the museum is trying to include Indigenous voices more into their space and how knowledge is actually considered valuable in those spaces. So my research was designed with community in mind throughout that process. And I really wanted to include member checking at the end of all of my interviews. So having all of my results sent back to my interviewers to be like, just to make sure I'm not misunderstanding anything. I don't want to be like, oh, I think this is what you mean, and getting it completely wrong. So really trying to make sure that I am respecting my participants and also respecting their knowledge that they are willing to share with me, and making sure that I get it right has been something I've been really anxious about. But I have also found that like reaching out to people is really sometimes useless, as bad as that sounds, because like a lot of times you just don't get replies, and that's okay. That's an answer in itself. so narrowing down my, like, people I can actually have access to has been harder. And it sometimes feels like community is less involved in a way, even though I'm like, I only have one person who's not a community member in my research. So, but yeah, really just centering knowledge, I think, at the center of that has been to make sure that, like, this is about the community and about the people that I want to make sure can actually benefit from my project.
Yeah, so I work with museums as well, but I'm very like behind the scenes, not with the curatorial, like display stuff, and more in the archives. Like I said with my introduction, that kind of brings me into this space where I'm a guest a lot of times, so I'm working with other communities' materials and not my own. So one example which is becoming a very key part of my dissertation is at the McCord Museum. There's a drum on display that belongs to Mistawasis, which is out in Saskatchewan, not my community at all. And when I saw this drum on display, I saw reasons and justifications for a repatriation. I decided to reach out again, reaching out was very interesting. When you reach out to a community that you're not involved with, you send some emails and nobody responds, and then you go find the Facebook page and somebody responds instantly. So you got to find the right channels to get to people, and that's always an interesting aspect when you're trying to engage with another community. So I had very like fanciful ideas with this drum that I thought a repatriation could happen, and there could be all sorts of things like dual exhibits between the museum and the community. And then when I reached out to the community and I started talking to them, they were excited about the idea of a repatriation, but they told me, hey, Wade, slow down. Here we have conceptions and believe the museum is still a very colonial space, and we're hesitant to explore those ideas. So when you're working with other communities, I feel, yeah, I came in with all my ideas, but it's got to be their directive and what they want. So that wasn't a route that they wanted to go down. So I had to pivot away from that and go with the direction that they wanted to go with. Additionally, kind of being in the museums, I've also had the fortune of being able to work directly with my community. So I've worked with the Smithsonian's Museum of National History in Washington, D.C. I got to work with their archives, and they house stuff from my community in Fredericton, St. Mary's. And that's where I've started to work with Silences, is their archives focus very heavily on the museum's perception of objects and items, how it's came into their ownership, that line of possession. And there's a lot of silences in those archives. So I've started to reach out to people back home and say, here, this is what we have in this archive that I've been able to find. And I've been able to fill in and backfill these archival spaces and these silences. People that were just, a single passing name, I've been able to ask about them, and stories have come out about how that person worked with an anthropologist that came through the community and that they took them to another community. And so that's filled out their archive into a lot more robust and deep information, just kind of by engaging the community and talking to people about where those silences are and where knowledge might be able to fill those spaces and gaps.
I'm hearing from all of you that like the importance of relationship building, whether that's with your own community or external community, but also being able to hear the resistances and the silences when people don't want or are not ready to be involved, and how you have to adapt and change, and recognizing that this is also your own personal desire to pursue a graduate diploma, and that's going to make you access, certain resources and like change your social status, and being able to recognize that that doesn't necessarily, that the impact is on you more so maybe than some community, and that's why some people might not be willing to collaborate. And so I would like to ask you, and this is sort of like the last question already, we still have 15 minutes, but what was your initial plan? What were you imagining? Like, in which ways were you imagining involving community, and how did you have to adapt And if you want to give us like anecdotes or examples of like ways that you've had to change, that would be great. Does one of you want to start?
Well, I think that I had very kind of grandiose dreams of what I could do in this research. So I really thought that I could, create a new version of Photo Voice, have mentors, co-adapt it alongside me with an elder, and then I would be able to try it out with mentees. And, I think that that's a noble goal, but because, some things had to slow down, I'm only able within this, project to co-amend the model with mentors. And so, there's future research that needs to happen because of that. And so, just being mindful of, people's time, people's energy, people's ability to kind of show up. I'm just focusing on that for now. So, that was a learning curve, that, you can't do everything you want and put a bow on the end of research because that's what I want. So, trying to be amenable to that. And, realizing that, the end of a project, you don't have a definitive answer necessarily. So, just trying to kind of navigate that space and open it up for maybe future questions. So,
does that speak to any of you? Someone wants to continue on how they've adapted and changed their research?
Yeah, I think I also initially had this very like grandiose idea of like, oh, I'm gonna get so many people involved and there's gonna be so much stuff. And like that just isn't the case, I guess. Like it is harder, like I said, to get people who want to, especially working with museums. I mean, a lot of people don't want to be associated with a colonial institution. And that fully understand. So like it's not something everyone's interested in. I also had plans of people with like a ton of different backgrounds and maybe people outside the museum, but in the end, all of my community members had been involved with the museum in some capacity. So I really only had people involved with the museum, which meant that there was less pressure on them. There was less risk of harm of bringing up these like more painful backgrounds. So it was more of an ethics, I think, decision than anything else. And people, all of my participants are very much okay with being associated with the museum because they already are. So that was a big one. And like timing, I think I had really good timing for the museum. The Manitoba Museum is changing all of their policies. They recently did updates a couple of years ago and they're continuing to do these updates. So changing all these policies and having community involved with the museum is something the museum's doing more. So I was a really good person to bring in on that case. But the timing for the community didn't necessarily work out just because there are so many. In Manitoba right now, there are a lot of communities that are opening their own institutions and having their own storage facilities and having this more agency over their own material culture. So there are less people who are willing to talk about these larger institutions and more wanting to talk about their own, which I was open to, but they also were like, we don't really have full plans yet. So like, we're not really wanting to talk about it. So it was a lot of respecting boundaries that I think I didn't initially even think of. And just kind of knowing when to stop and not pry for this information or pry for more people, and having that kind of topic shift of moving to studying policies and looking at more public documents that are available rather than archival work. So there has been a bit of a shift, and I think you kind of just have to go with the flow, especially when community, your initial plan for community just doesn't work out. I think that's totally okay. So that was my anecdote. Anyone else?
Yeah, I can kind of tack on to that as well. Yeah, I feel like how I started, I anticipated everything kind of being a little different. I anticipated the museum being a space that's very colonial, very rigid, and wanting to keep everything in order. I was anticipating a big fight with them. And I was anticipating it would be a lot more easy and that there would be this cooperation, that I got a lot more pushback on. I kind of, again, had these grandiose ideas of, oh, we could maybe facilitate an exchange and have youth put things on display. I was just thinking, and things were getting very grand. And then, yeah, the community's feelings on the museum were very different. The museum is in a very different place than I anticipated. I thought there would be these very tense political walls and policies, but they're very fluid. They've hired an Indigenous curator who's exceptional and doing amazing work. And so I found, yeah, when I got into there, I had to adapt. I was ready to be very confrontational and fight a museum that was very willing to do this work and is looking to do this work. So yeah, kind of where you're anticipating fights sometimes just aren't there. So I felt like I was very geared up for a fight with the museum that they weren't ready to have. So I kind of had to adapt and learn that they're actually a partner and working with them there. So yeah.
And you shared, when we prepared for this, you share the ways you've had to adapt, and some of the resistance has come from politics. Do you want to talk about that with the Smithsonian?
Oh yeah, the Smithsonian. Yeah, so I've been working with the Smithsonian Museum, and there's been a lot of changes there with their current administration that oversees their national museums. So I've seen, that there's like community projects and there's things that the community that the Smithsonian has, and I've reached out to people about wanting to do things and work with stuff, and there's fears, and they don't actually want to engage with like an American institution at this moment of time. And so, there's been people that have asked to kind of just not engage with that stuff right now, given the current political climate in the States. So, in these ways, like other outside forces are interfering, kind of, and where it's those political ties that are prohibiting the work from getting done.
Thanks. I just thought that was interesting. It's like another force that we're not necessarily thinking about, but the political climate, how that can directly influence your research. Agathe, do you want to talk about if you've had to adapt and change from your initial plan to how it's going now?
Yeah. I work in a school system, so the pros of that are I have colleagues I can call upon, I can see where they would like change. And before I even started the PhD program, I went around and asked, like, what do you want to see? The language teachers were having difficulties, obstacles trying to pass on the language. The classroom teachers wanted more language and culture in their room. Everybody wants more language and culture. So my initial thought was I was going to go and find out the obstacles. Let's find a way to fix this. But it is a school system, so everybody's busy. So when it comes down to it, it's like, at first I thought I could do this, find out what the obstacles are. This is what they are. Let's fix this, do this. But there's other curriculums in there that it's busy. There's always a test going on. Something's always going on. So when I'm actually going to implement something, the teachers are busy. They have their own work to do. And this is like my research versus, I need to get grading done so I can do my report card. So my initial source of information, when you're actually trying to implement something, it's hard because they have a workload already. So I had to change the way my research is. And what I'm going to do is I have to make it the easiest possible way to combine the Indigenous knowledge and the Western curriculum for these teachers who are already tired and busy. So there's pros and cons to both of what I'm doing for my research. So I had to tweak it, and I'm still kind of working on how is this going to work. So I'm not creating more work for everybody. So that was mine.
So I'm hearing competing timelines between maybe the teacher's agenda and capacity versus yours and your research, and you also want to be able to graduate and finish, and so adapting and making your research as light as possible so that community members don't feel like it's a burden, but really something that can add value to their work in the long term. Would Christine and Brooke like to talk about how you've changed your research? And then And we're going to finish with one of you, actually, before we go to questions.
I'll be very quick. Okay, then. OK, excellent. Ben là, so I'm just getting started. I'm doing my comps. I'm not even in there yet. But because I'm already working with, so I work with the Cher Réseau Jeunesse Autochtone and l'Institut National de la Recherche Scientifique. We're already collaborating with community organizations working with youths on Inuit leadership, and I'm doing my work on Inuit youth leadership, so it's really aligning so well. So we're thinking, why don't we combine our resources and our efforts so that we can work together? So I thought that I would do maybe like my master's going in my community and maybe doing a week-long, 2-week-long thing. But it sounds like it might be like a more long-term thing that I can return to communities. I'm really excited.
Yeah, I mean, I've had similar experiences as everyone else where you start something and you have these grand ideas and then reality sets in. So for me, I'd wanted a lot more, I guess, involvement of community organizations. And initially I'd planned to, put in requests for information for them to share data that they may had in their own personal organizational archives. And so when I started that process, some people said, right off the bat that they didn't even know if they had data stored from that project, what the quality would be like, if it was complete or not. And then others who are more, I guess, used to research requests had me go through their ethics review process and jump through a lot of hoops. And that was looking very promising. And then, they said, okay, yeah, we'll collaborate, we'll share data that we have on file. And then I think they maybe got nervous or started looking at their files. And then they came back to me saying that they had no data on file, which, kind of seemed more that they had those hesitations. And I think, others talked about, when you see that resistance of not to push. So yeah, I experienced that quite a bit. And I think with, I wanted to frame my project in a very positive way and to not, necessarily touch on like some controversial aspects, like project financing or those kind of things. But with infrastructure development in Kahnawake, it can be, there are some areas that are sensitive, and when I've strayed into those zones, I've kind of, like I've noticed when there's like a change in tone, or all of a sudden an organization is kind of seems a little bit more reluctant, or there have been times where I've been meeting with an organization and they're telling me about like, okay, yeah, we actually had this project, it didn't come to fruition. And I was like, oh, okay, I didn't know. And so they told me a lot about the information, and then they seemed to backtrack by telling me like they didn't actually want me to include that project in my research. So yeah, and with infrastructure too, it's, no project is ever completed on time or on budget. So I think that is also was part of some of these experiences. But yeah, I'm not done with my research. I still have quite a long way to go. So hopefully some things will work out.
Thank you. So what we didn't talk about, but is, I think, an understanding, is that when we do Indigenous research, we see the value and want to do community engaged research. Maybe like we skipped over that, but I think that's very central to Indigenous research, of like making sure that the research is relevant and meets a need in our communities or the communities that we work with. And so I hope that from today you were able to grasp some of the ways that we adapt, the ways that we do research, the silences and the gaps and the resistances that the students have identified, and how they have managed and like navigated through those obstacles. So hopefully that gives you also some inspiration and ways that you can, inspiration for the ways that you can work with community and have a lot of flexibility. So I'm gonna open it for questions if there are any. Alicia says there are questions. I'll just say, Tiawink, thank you so much for being here and online, Agathe, and for sharing about the ways that you're doing your research right now. And if you are an Indigenous grad student who is involving or wants to involve community members in your research, the program, the Selfies program, so the funding that these students received, we will open another round of application. It's going to open on March 9th. You'll have a month to apply. It's a very simple form to submit. So if you're interested, I would encourage you to maybe come grab one of our postcards so that you can have access to our website and our social media and be aware of when the funding is going to open. So yeah, I'll leave it to Fort Space to guide us through with the questions. Okay.
Wonderful. So if anyone in the space has a question, just raise your hand and we'll bring this microphone on over to you. Anyone online, you can feel free to raise your virtual hand, or you can type your question right into the chat and we'll read it out loud for you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for all of your input. You've talked about archives and maintaining and these sort of relations within the archive and community, but I'm just curious about like your role in maintaining those archives or that information. You know, there's a lot of discussions about data sovereignty right now. So just maybe getting your perspectives on how to best do that. Maybe also touching on bringing this sort of research into academia and what that means, right? Yeah, what is your thoughts on data sovereignty when you're dealing with community archives? Thanks.
Well, one way that I address it is kind of why I wanted to have a community committee elders group, so that they could kind of guide us through which collections do we want to work with, and depending on the youths who will be accessing these archives that we'll be working with, is it because it's their family members? Is it because it's families that speak to them and things like that? I want it to be the community members themselves who help us navigate. How do we use them? How are we going to talk about them? How are we going to illustrate them through arts? That's one way that I found.
Hi, I can't speak directly to archives, but you know, in terms of data sovereignty, it's something that I think about quite a lot. And you know, something that I'm doing within my research is I'm sharing the transcripts with all of the co-creators, the mentors, after the focus groups and the interviews, so that they can decide, you know, if there's a part of what they said that wants to be redacted. So they're really in charge of, you know, what's going to be shared with the larger audience. Another thing that I'm really trying to focus on is I'm going to invite all of the co-creators to my defense so that they could see how their information is going to be disseminated. And then they'll have an opportunity to speak as well. So, you know, always trying to be mindful about, you know, this isn't just about me or my voice, and really, you know, being respectful and humble to that.
I believe we have another question here in this space, but you're going to answer first. Go ahead.
Yeah, I kind of, around sovereignty, I kind of straddle this border between the US and Canada and work with museums there. And so there's a very interesting dynamic of the US uses like legislation where Canada uses policy, where in the US they have NAGPRA, the Grave and Protections Act. that dictates a lot of stuff around how to manage that. Kind of at the national, not the national, but the Museum of the American Indian in New York has taken a certain approach, and as well as the Museum of National History in New York just kind of shut down its Indigenous wings with the latest updates to NAGPRA. So the approach has kind of been to shut everything down and to go to individual groups and communities and to talk to them. That's kind of something that I agree with, to kind of go individual, and that each case with an archive and with material goods kind of has to be taken case by case. So it's not really a nice, clean answer, but yeah, it's that you got to take everything case by case and contact communities that it belongs to. So yeah, case by case.
Thank you very much for the panel, and I have a question for everyone. Like, one could ask specific questions, but my question is, what is the role of emotion in what you do? And that might seem unusual, but theater, like in theater and performance in the arts, the artist talks about their emotion, or the performer, but in a way what you're doing could be very cold and scientific, but it isn't. So what is the role of emotion in what you're doing? And do you have moments when you've experienced like a strong emotion or like a sense of discovery at something unusual, something surprising? What are those moments?
Yeah, that's a tough one, actually. I mean, I think working with museums, a lot of the narratives that are told in museums are of trauma. And that is oftentimes that very like issue with Indigenous exhibition spaces, is how much can you break down a community just to their trauma. So when I specifically ask questions with community members about that, that's more so when emotions tend to come up, as well as talking about things like repatriation and ancestors on display or in museum collections. And a lot of it is just like distraught. It is very hard as an Indigenous person to hear about like, oh, there's 250 ancestors in collection that we're trying to repatriate, but we can't really because we don't really know where things are and we don't know where things went, and the archives are bad and that kind of stuff. And then there's also, I try to incorporate hope as much as I can, just because I think there is, like I said, that like if Indigenous people are just trauma and just broken down to that, then what is there for the future? So I really try to incorporate in how community members or museum workers are really hopeful about the future and incorporating these voices, and how they're hoping that will change a lot of the narratives around museums and around communities' involvement, and actually advocating for communities to have their own institutions rather than going to these large institutions. Because most people who work in museums are very much like, we shouldn't have this. Like, this should be with the community. So a lot of the emotional aspects that come up in my own research are either really sad or really happy. So I try to just incorporate those emotions into my actual results.
I love this question. Thank you so much. I think that, I think maybe when I started this program, I thought I needed to separate, my empirical thought with my emotions as I was moving forward. But really, my heart is what's driving this. My heart, because I see the abundance that exists with my mentees, and I want to find a way to facilitate them sharing the stories within themselves, amongst cohorts at Indigitech, and just realize that the inherent strengths that they have. And so that is what's driving everything. And also heart is what, allows me to see when it's time to take pause, and to just listen, and then maybe to, go a different path. So, I think that actually the heart is front and center of my work.
I think think that's all the time we have for questions today, but we're just going to show a close-up of the postcard information for those of you online. So we'll get that set up for you. There you go. So hopefully you can see that. That's the Office of Community Engagement, Co-Creating Positive Change. And if there's any other information, we'll be sure to put that in the chat as we continue the day. So with that, thank you to everyone for coming to ForSpace and activating this conversation. Thank you all so much, and thank you for your questions and your contributions. We're going to be closing up the live stream, but we will be keeping the Zoom open all day. So for all of you who are joining us there online, just take a short break and we'll be back with our next panel. And for those of you in the space, please enjoy the coffee and refreshments at the back. And our next panel will be underway very shortly. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.